What's going on, everybody? We are back for another episode of the Multiverse Xperience Podcast. As always, I am your host, Steven, aka The Economistic on X. Thank you so much for tuning in. As you can see by the thumbnail as well as the title, today I'm excited to bring to you a conversation interview with the CEO of Itheum, Mark Paul. So I want to thank Mark so much for being on the show, for your time and all the responses. I'm really excited to share it with everybody. So be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the podcast. And that reminds me that Mark and the team at Itheum have given me an Itheum Trailblazer Data NFT to give away. So be sure to check out this post on X. You must reshare the video on Twitter as well as subscribe to MVX Podcast. So like I said, the Itheum team has given me an Itheum Trailblazer Data NFT. If you're curious what is a Data NFT, of course, keep watching the video. But pretty much I learned from Mark that what Itheum is building is kind of this idea of NFT 2.0. So check the description for all of the links to profiles. Make sure to give Itheum as well as Mark Paul a follow on X as well. All of the chapters of the videos will also be in the description, so check that out. So a reminder for the viewers that I am shortening the episodes now. If you've been tuning in for a while, I want to thank you so much for your support. But moving forward, the videos will be separated in interviews with my guests, and then I will do ecosystem updates and news in separate videos to make the videos quite a bit shorter. I think some of my longest videos were over 3 hours. So thank you so much for all the support on that. All right, before we get into the video, I want to say a huge thank you to the video's sponsors, Pulsar Money, eApes, Plata Network, as well as Super Rare Bears. Really appreciate your support here. So for those of you that don't know, Pulsar Money is kind of innovating the Web3 space with smart contracts and social payments, streamlining blockchain interactions on MultiversX. So they're doing a whole lot more with DeFi, but that reminds me to check out the post on Twitter for this as well. Pulsar Money has given me 3 million MEX to give away. So if you're familiar with it, you know that you can just drop some engagement on the Twitter post and the Pulsar Money social payments will automatically send over the allotted MEX. So Pulsar Money is the first sponsor. Next we have eApes, which is a leading NFT on MultiverseX. Many of us know 10,000 unique 3D art apes, and they've set records in sales and community engagement. So next we've got Plata Network, a racing-themed digital asset creator on MultiverseX. So Plata Network offers innovative NFTs and DeFi experiences for motorsports fans. So super cool. Plata was also one of the very first mints on MultiverseX whenever NFTs came to MultiverseX. So that's really cool. And last but certainly not least, we've got Super Rare Bears, another NFT project on MultiverseX with 10,000 unique NFTs. On top of this, they do have an interactive game called Samurai Pandemonium. So you must, of course, hold a Super Rare Bears NFT in order to play this game. But Super Rare Bears is really cool. I own several of them, and they blend digital art with interactive gaming on this blockchain. All right, we're going to get into the video now, but again, huge thank you to the sponsors, eApes, Pulsar Money, Plata Network, and Super Rare Bears. Be sure to engage with this on Twitter to be a part of the social payments from Pulsar Money giveaway, as well as the Itheum Trailblazer Data NFT. So again, thank you so much for watching, and I really hope you enjoy this chat with Mark. How's it going, everybody? We are thrilled to have the chance to speak today to Mark Paul, as you can see on the screens in front of you. Mark Paul is the founder as well as the CEO of Itheum. Mark is basically the visionary behind Itheum, as what I can tell from the many podcasts and AMA sessions that Mark has on the internet. Itheum is a trailblazing company at the forefront of data ownership and Web3 technology. I believe that Mark is a dynamic leader in the blockchain space. As I mentioned, he's present all over Twitter or X, whichever you prefer. There is a Spotify podcast where you can catch all of the answers to different questions in case this interview does not catch anything. But for starters, Itheum is a standout as a smart contract-based protocol, not just a blockchain, but they are revolutionizing industries ranging from gaming to healthcare, finance, content creation. We're going to get a whole bunch more into it. Without further ado, Mark Paul, welcome to Multiverse Xperience Podcast. It's great to have you on the show.
Hey, what's up, Steven? Great to be here. Thanks for that awesome intro. Super pumped to be doing this podcast. So yeah, let's dive straight in, man.
Yeah. So I just want to say that, of course, I'm really happy that Itheum has selected MultiversX, previously known as Elrond Network, to build on. And again, I'm going to say it once more, just because, Mark, you're so prevalent in the community, answering questions and providing your vision through these different podcasts. I'm going to drop these links in the description to make sure that the viewers can catch those as well. But like I said, Itheum has selected MultiversX blockchain to build their protocol on. And there are lots of reasons, but in short, I would say, from what I've heard, it sounds like the community and the tech is kind of why Itheum has chosen MultiversX. So, Mark, if you want to expand on that anymore, why you chose MultiversX, and then dive into a brief introduction of Itheum, give us an overview of some things that I touched on, and feel free to go as deep as you want as well.
Yeah, sure. All right. So let's dive into that first question, right? Why MultiversX or why Elrond? Because when we started this journey, it was Elrond. Yeah, I think you kind of summarized it. It is I would say a combination of three things. One is the tech. The tech is really good. Personally, I'm a very technical person, come from like 20 years of tech. So I did do a bit of due diligence on there, and I like the tech a lot. Second, of course, is the product direction, right? If you look at Elrond, they've always kind of gone after the user experience element, right? So initially they were like very low key, like no one knew about them, and they were like pumping out these really cool products with great UX. So we felt like that kind of aligned with what we wanted as well. I mean, there's a bigger story as to why we ended up picking Elrond or MultiversX. But yeah, these are the two main things, and finally we felt like they were in the right position of tech, product, community growth. They had like this really loyal community that we knew we had to tap into, because we're launching a data protocol. We need users, right? Like people who are engaged in this whole Web3 space. So that's kind of why we picked MultiversX. Maybe I'll kind of dive into a little bit more as to how the journey actually ended up in this way. Maybe I'll go into a bit more about Itheum in general. Does that sound all right?
Yes, please. Yeah,
cool. Yeah, so Itheum is think of it as a data ownership and data brokerage protocol. We empower individuals, enterprises, brands who have like high value data assets to tokenize it and then share or trade it as you would trade any other asset, right? So for us, if you look at what's happening in the world today now, everything is an asset, right? Like we look at financially, Bitcoin, ETH, e-gold, all of these are financial assets in a certain aspect. We see no difference to data as well. The data is very valuable. You could tokenize it and make it an asset. So we feel like in the future, everyone will tokenize their data. Like you as an individual, when you're plugged into the metaverse and when you've been controlled by AI, your data is going to be tokenized and be feeding all these engines, right? So Web 2 clearly doesn't have the technology to make that happen. So we built Itheum to enable this tokenization of real world data assets. Like that's the vision, obviously, but what does that mean to everyday people like you and me? We are a smart contract based protocol deployed on MultiversX. We are eventually going to be omni-chain. What that means is we'll be split across multiple chains. And you as an individual, you can come and If you have some high value original data, let's say you're a musician or you're a gamer and you're producing some original data, you can, with a few clicks, tokenize your data and trade it as you would trade NFTs. So that's version 1 of Ethereum, and we'll dive into what version 2 and so forth would look like.
Right. Which is awesome that, you're talking about this future of Ethereum. In your interviews, you talk about the hope, of course. At one point, you do say the coming 20 to 30 years, you hope that this protocol will sustain, but you even say 50 years. And personally, my hope is that we get to see this evolve over beyond 50 years as well. So I want to ask you to cover the main 6 components of Ethereum, and to the audience out there. And what I meant to say just a moment there was that Ethereum will continue to evolve over the years. But from my understanding, and what I'm very excited about, and what really led to this interview, was really me beginning to understand that, this idea of NFT, non-fungible token, is an idea. But what I do believe with the data NFTs, Ethereum, and many would agree, is really kind of creating this idea of NFT 2.0. So I touched on one of the main components of Ethereum there with your data NFTs, as well as the data NFT marketplace, which, as you said, will empower many different individuals. So what are the other 4 main components of Ethereum, Mark?
Yeah. So yeah, we'll touch back on data NFTs because that's fundamentally like the core building block of Ethereum. So firstly, Ethereum is infrastructure, right? So we're not a DApp or a project. In that aspect, we're building infrastructure, and then you build on top of Ethereum. And this is why our vision is a 50-year mission. Because if we are successful, everyone's building and taking ownership of data on Ethereum. So data NFTs are the core building block. So think of them as, like you said, supercharged NFTs. For us, NFTs are basically the way you tokenize real world assets. And guess what? Every real world asset has got data behind it, right? So you need to also somehow bring this data on chain. So data NFTs are the NFT standard with a few additional parameters that allow you to tokenize data. They're super powerful. They are like dynamic, they're interactive. So you can actually open up a data NFT, look at the data, interact with it programmatically. We got SDKs, you can build on top of it, you can piece them together like building blocks and so forth, so on and so forth. So once you understand data NFTs and you know that they represent a license to your data, you got to think about what's next. Okay, what am I going to do next? Okay, you can either choose to share these in a peer-to-peer marketplace. That's where the data NFT marketplace comes in. No different to an NFT marketplace. It's exactly the same. In fact, like if you come to the data NFT marketplace, it looks exactly like a NFT marketplace, but think of it as a data market that's decentralized. We got another component called the data DEX, which is a portal on top of the data NFT marketplace. The data DEX is like the entry point. You can come in there, you can mint your data NFTs, you can join some pre-built programs that automatically generate data for you to mint. You can access the data NFT marketplace, you can access your data NFT wallet, and you can access your data in there. We have another system called the claims portal, which distributes the royalties and stuff. All of that is collected via the data DEX. So that's the third element. The other one that's very interesting is what we call Ethereum Explorer. And Ethereum Explorer is effectively a way where you can explore data NFTs and the data behind it, right? And how you do this is that you can actually pre-build sort of mini apps that are built on top of data NFTs, and you can visualize the data. The idea being that, if you're interested in data, you need to be able to visualize it before you commit to maybe buying a data NFT. So that's what Ethereum Explorer is. And the remaining sort of basically infrastructure tooling, you got SDKs. We are working on a decentralized data brokerage network called the Data Marshall Network. So there are some entry points into that, but those are more on the tooling side of things.
Awesome. Yeah. So there are lots of things you mentioned there for sure. But for those watching, this information can be found on other interviews and so forth. But let's just remind ourselves kind of the importance of Ethereum, kind of just along the lines of the current industry, how the data is taken from us, how much money it kind of cultivates, what sort of industries surround the data, and really kind of taking maybe a farther step back, kind of at what point did you see this rising and see the real opportunity for, these Web3 technologies to come in and kind of fix things from this bottom-up approach, which we'll get into a little bit more?
Yeah. Ultimately, that's what we're trying to solve. The fact that what we're talking about is not new. It already exists. The data marketplace already exists. It's a centralized marketplace. It's estimated to be about a $300 billion market. There's about 4,000 data brokers, they're called, and data brokers are effectively companies that give you a free app, and then you go and use that app and you think, oh, this is great, it's free, but in fact you're just paying for it with your data. So there's about, conservatively, there's about 4,000 of these industries. And if you can think of AI coming into the picture, it's going to just explode, right? Because AI needs data from data brokers. So where did this begin, right? So I come from 20 years of traditional tech experience. So I started off working for a social media giant called MSN, or Microsoft Network, in the early days of the MSN Messenger and Hotmail and all this. And then I moved to different industries like media and broadcast. I was in digital health for many years. And to me, every industry that I was in, it was so obvious what was happening, that we build products, we basically attract customers, and then there's two parts, right? You're paying for the product if it's a SaaS platform, but in reality, the real value was when they harvest the data, right? And then I would see other issues around how they would lock up the data in silos and they don't really share it. So, there's absolutely no way for you to solve this problem with Web2 technology. It just doesn't exist. But tokenization of data, Web3, NFTs, these are perfect building blocks to solve this problem. So that's what we're doing. We're taking a pragmatic approach. Like, we're not trying to go and do everything all at once. Like, we've started off with what we call active data collection, and we'll kind of dive into what I mean by this. And then Ethereum, we would probably start reaching more adoption when we start moving into passive data collection. And we'll talk about that as well.
Yeah. So that's something that took me a little bit of time to understand, how, product versus the consumer, how kind of we, the people, are kind of being used in a way, in a very real way, for our data. And it's always this kind of tricky interaction, I would say, when it comes to our own data. And hopefully people can grow to learn the importance of their own data. I feel like, at some point during the internet age, the importance of owning our data, and I think this all kind of rose to the surface predominantly with Facebook, kind of, and Mark Zuckerberg, and his trial and so forth. But I want to kind of zoom in on how we can go about kind of getting people to really make this shift. And I kind of think that it has a lot to do with really getting people to understand the value of their data. So when it comes to individuals and their data, what do you think are some of those key components? And what would you say to somebody perhaps that would say, yeah, I know that my data is used and sold, but when I go to Amazon, this is the personalized experience that I want. So do you think it's going to take some sort of action, some negative news, some negative press to continue to remind people that your data is worth a lot and your data should be protected and ideally should be owned by you? Or what do you kind of foresee things unfolding as you continue to develop and push for the progress for Itheum?
Yeah, that's a good question, man, and you structured it really well. So this is the biggest challenge, right? Because we all know that our data is being taken from us, but in reality, if you were to order this in a scheme of other things that we should be concerned about with everything else happening in the world, it's probably right at the bottom of the list, right? Because like you said, we are seeing the benefit of it. Like, if I go to Amazon, if I go to Netflix, if I go to Spotify, I'm seeing stuff that I like. So it kind of almost seems like, it's a good thing that our data is being taken off from us. But make no mistake, what we're just seeing is like the happy part. There's also a bad part here, right? Like, your data is not just being used to personalize, your music playlist. It's also being used to target ads at you. So your same data is being sold in an ad marketplace, where they're profiled you and they're able to nudge you into doing things that you otherwise wouldn't do, right? Like as an example, maybe there's something you really want to buy, but financially not ready to do it. They can nudge you into buying that, and then you might end up in some financial difficulty. Or maybe you haven't decided who you're going to vote for in the next election, and you have a valid reason because you're not quite sure. They're able to nudge you down a path that they want. This is the scary part, man, because no one really understands this. Now, add AI to the mix, it's going to exponentially go down the scary path, right? Because now we are producing fake content that can nudge us into doing things that we don't want to do. So this is the biggest challenge right now. What Ethereum is trying to do is make it interesting that you pay attention to owning your data, right? Like if we come out and say, hey, your data is valuable, just upload some medical records and then you get some tokens, you will probably do it for the wrong reasons. You're just trying to get these tokens. But what if we say something like, hey, you're a musician, mint your music as a music data NFT, and then engage with a new audience. This now suddenly starts to take a different narrative. You're like interested in what's happening with data ownership. So right from the beginning, Ethereum always said is we're trying to take this really boring topic of data ownership and try to make it a bit interesting and sexy. We always said try to make data ownership sexy, right? And and that is use cases, but also products that kind of want you to participate. If we can get the attention of people, if they start to understand, hey, there is something interesting here with data ownership, and I'm actually interested in it, we can scale it up. And then we can start doing passive data collection, which I will get into later on. And then it starts scaling, right? And then we start tapping into this space where the centralized data brokers now start to see, their user base eroding because people are now opting in from the bottom up to go to a different app that's built on Ethereum, as an example. On that point, something interesting that I've been thinking about recently, right? If you think about Bitcoin, right? Like prior to 2008, like we all trusted our banks to do things in our best interest. We just gave them the trust. We liked the personalization we got from them. But it was after the financial crisis of 2008 that people said, hey, the bank's holding my asset, which is my financial asset. I need ownership of that. And Bitcoin effectively gives me that. So, and that narrative started to build after there was a huge catastrophe that impacted everyone. So what happens if, let's say, one of these huge Web2 companies that have collected all this data is breached at a global level, right? And we all lose our identities. That might be the turning point when regulators and even people like you and me were like, that's the Bitcoin moment for data, right? Like, okay, we have to tokenize data. We have to take ownership of it. So that's, I think eventually going to happen with everything you see in the world today. But yeah, that's another way to look at it, right? It's the Bitcoin moment for data.
Yeah, I really like that. And I mean, it gives you kind of the sense of the scale of not only the importance, but also hopefully kind of what's coming, not for the sake of we all, make profits off of our tokens that we bought, because again, I want to emphasize that my hope and my whole reason that I've gotten into the blockchain and began studying it was because that I think it adds great value to the user itself. It as you were saying with the banks in 2008, there was no question, we just trusted. And it's such a new concept, the idea of having not built-in trust, but trust is not existent. Rather, it's verified. And so that's just a brand new concept for so many different people to start to understand. So, I mean, it's a fun journey to watch things progress and deal with the challenges of trying to let people know and educate people almost, from my perspective, it's like, here's a solution to some of these problems, and it gets pushed back, and it's like, it makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm just going to keep on doing what I do and staying with it. But I'm really looking forward to the kind of advent of that Bitcoin moment, whether it be directly in the world of finance, or if it does when it does breach over to the data itself. So I want to take a moment there, because you're talking about really intimate things, in terms of just things that started Itheum in the first place. So I would love to just give you an opportunity to share with the viewers what is behind the name Itheum. It says some on your website, and I think it's important to allow people to hear you explain where Itheum comes from and extrapolate on kind of really what's already been discussed just prior to.
Yeah. It's a long journey, and it's an interesting story. So I think about 5 years ago, I was working in the health industry, and at that point, I had a family member who had specifically a cardiovascular health problem, which we later found out that by using data, you could have detected that earlier, right? So to me, it was because I was already in the health industry. To me, the issue was with data silos. We had to create a way to break down data silos. So 5 years ago, the first version of Itheum was born, and believe it or not, the first version of Itheum was actually a hardware device, and it would sit in your home, and it had the ability to listen in on data collection devices in your house. So if you had a Bluetooth blood pressure monitor, for example, it could intercept it and take the data out. And the idea is it grabs it, stores it on the hardware, so it's secure, and then shares it with your consent, right? So that was the first version of Itheum. Obviously, this was like very early, and the hardware device itself cost a lot to manufacture. So at some point, we decided, you know what, that's not the best path forward. Itheum then evolved to the second version, which became an aggregator for health data. So it would connect to your Fitbit and your Strava and all of that stuff, aggregate the data, and then create like a centralized stream of data out. And this tool was in the Web 2 space, right? So again, very early, the idea of data ownership in Web 2 was almost unheard of. But the real sort of change happened is when we started pivoting to Web 3, because we looked at, because I was in Web 3 since about 2016 or so, and I was a Ethereum developer at that point. And it was so obvious to me that if we can take this Web 2 data that's coming up from the Web 2 world, tokenize it with NFT standard, and then create a tokenized marketplace, it would just make sense. So that's kind of how Etheum picked up and ended up in Web 3. Now, to going back to the question about the name, as I was saying, Etheum originated as a solution to solve cardiovascular health problems in the real world, and Itheum stands for heart in my native language. So that's the origin of the name and how it evolved. And now Itheum basically means it's like the heart of the community and the heart of data.
Yeah, it's very tangible, that sense of how intimate this whole idea of data collection can become. I mean, we're all just humans, but we're all kind of carrying these individual personalities and preferences. And it would be good to just hear from you in simple terms. How does Itheum improve upon the traditional data management systems of Web 2?
I don't believe there is such a thing as data management systems of Web 2. I think what it is just a bunch of fragmented data silos, right? If you're using a social media app, that's one silo. If you go to your doctor, that's another silo. If you go to your bank, that's another silo. And they don't share the data, right? They just basically sell it to each other. So there is really no data management system that is helpful for individuals or even enterprises or brands. And this because there's no way for you to claim ownership of your data. For you to be able to create things like, data sharing or networks and so on like this, you need to like tokenize and claim ownership of your data. So Etheum's effectively aiming to do that. So if you look at what you can do with Etheum today, you can tokenize what we call active data. And what do I mean by that is you have to actively create original data. So you're either a musician producing music, which is original data, and you're actively doing this work, or you're a data scientist and you have done some on-chain investigation and created some sort of insights, and you've done a lot of effort, or you're an author and you've like done some active work. So you're actively producing data, and we let you tokenize it. So in fact, the data NFT collections we have on board now and that are coming up are all these active sort of contributions of data creators. Now, this is only the first version, because we do understand that 99% of the world are passively collecting data. So as an example, you and I sitting and talking here, we could be wearing a smartwatch that's collecting our respiratory rates, our heart rate. So this is passive data collection. Or if you're a gamer and you're playing PlayStation for 10 hours a day, and who knows, but let's say you're doing that, you're passively collecting high value data. That's really valuable data. So when we can streamline the collection of active data and we create the tooling that generates this to like be traded and all that kind of stuff, we can start creating the tooling for passive. And when you go into passive, then anybody could, like with a couple of buttons or clicks, could tap in and like tokenize their passive data and then maybe share it and trade it and so on. That's the end goal. The end goal is everyone, regardless of whether you're a musician and you're actively doing something, or you're just a gamer sitting in your couch playing games, all of that is valuable data. All of that is valuable data.
Yeah.
And especially if you can group it in like cohorts, like one PlayStation gamer's data is not worth a lot. You group it in a cohort of 1,000 PlayStation gamers, it's worth a lot, because now you can do, you know, whatever the Web 2 world's doing to you by targeting you. So that's what the goal is. And yeah, I hope that kind of makes sense to where Ethereum fits in the picture. We're just trying to enable this thing that has to happen, right?
Yeah. And you mentioned these data silos. So I have a tendency of asking multiple questions all at once. So here we go again. But with these data silos, why does Web 2 do it this way? I mean, I would assume that it's for profit, but I'm sure they have their own reasons. And as somebody, you know, CEO of Itheum coming along to disrupt this industry, what are your kind of approaches to you know, selling your product to these individuals that kind of are fit in their Web 2 world?
Yeah. Okay, so there's two things here, right? So if you look at Ethereum is effectively a B2B2C platform. What we mean by that is we empower institutions or enterprises or brands to empower their users with data ownership. So now you're probably wondering why would these companies do that? Because, you know, they obviously already hoard data. But you look at where regulation's going at the moment, right? And look at GDPR and look at all these sort of regulation, which is now really pressurizing them. They're really putting pressure on these enterprises to show more corporate social responsibility. And we are seeing organizations now actively looking at blockchain and these sort of tools on how they can like mitigate risk of data breaches and stuff that happens to their data silos. So traditionally, an organization or an enterprise, let's say they are a social media company that's got a really cool app, they create a silo because for them the value is in the data, so they have to silo it up, right? But that doesn't mean that they are just they're holding it for themselves. It reaches a point, they sell it to other people and so on. Now, you can opt out. The way you opt out is you stop using the app, but then, you know, that's the choice you have. But most people don't take this choice, right? Because that's not really feasible. So our value proposition is this: hey, you can't, as an enterprise, you can't keep building apps that are harvesting data and expect to have no repercussion to do that. You could have done this maybe in the last 10 years, but we're reaching a point now, especially with AI coming and scraping all this data. There is going to be regulation, heavy regulation in AI on how data is used and consumed and with consent. There's going to be heavy regulation in health industries where how data is shared and so on. And this regulation is always going to call for a couple of things. They're going to call for self-sovereignty of data. In other words, you get to own your data, transparency on how it's used, continuous consent. And guess what, man? The only way to do all of these things is blockchain.
Yeah.
So I think that's where it fits in.
Yeah, that's interesting that we're talking about data and you're talking about this future where regulation comes in and the value proposition of Itheum kind of being the idea of getting ahead of that regulation. So just kind of a tangential question, when it comes to the regulation of just cryptocurrency, not the non-fungible side, but rather the fungible side, what are your thoughts on regulation on the fungible token side of things? And if regulation is saying you should own your data, well, in my biased view, I also say, well, we should also self-custody everything. banks shouldn't exist. Why are banks sucking up our money to make profit? I mean, and what sort of differences, when you kind of abstract it, are between owning your data and owning all of your assets, including your monetary, cash?
Yeah, so this is around the whole self-custody angle, right? Like I should be able to own all my assets, financial assets, my data assets. Even if you look at your consent as an asset, I consented to do this, that's an asset. So now I think what we're seeing here, so regulation, I feel like is in place. It's always trying to prevent misuse of technology, right? Like, or it's at least trying to curb the misuse of technology. And I guess that's where regulation is kind of sitting in. Now, whether it's fungible or non-fungible, I think it would still be around the realms of how can you prevent misuse of the technology. Now, self-custody, man, like I think regulation-wise, I think it might get a little bit more clearer once the user experience of self-custody is solved. There's a huge issue with the user experience of self-custody at the moment, right? Like how much of your assets are you going to put into your wallets if you lose your wallet next week? So let's say you put your entire financial history in a wallet, your financial assets in a wallet, and then like say Ethereum is super successful and you put all your data in there and you lose your wallet. What happens? You lose your entire identity. So I think maybe it would be interesting to have this discussion, I guess, when the user experience of blockchain is more like any other sort of Web2 product. As an example, let's imagine Apple rolls out wallets in all iPhones. All of a sudden, blockchain finds its product market fit, right? Because right now it's like this niche thing that you got to opt into, and then we are like worried about what regulation would do. But if it's already just a regular piece of technology sitting in your phone, and now you can put stuff in there, and maybe there are toolings on now how you can back up that stuff and all that done in a self-custody point of view, I would feel regulation would get a lot more friendlier. Right now, it's just because it's so unclear as to what the user experience is that it looks like very adversarial at the moment. But yeah, I think in time, man, like for what we have to like really be going for is improving the product market fit of blockchain. Like at the moment, we're talking about like Ethereum is a protocol built on blockchain, and we have product market fit, but our product market fit is going to be heavily dependent on the product market fit of blockchain, like wallets and all this kind of stuff. Just the same with all the DeFi protocols out there, right? Like you've got your own product market fit, but that's going to really like explode once blockchain reaches its product market fit. So, and I think regulation is the same. Like once you have this sort of better user experience, better recovery, better all of that kind of stuff, it would be probably a more friendlier regulation, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah. So what would you say to somebody who says, yes, we should own our data, but it should be controlled by a centralized agency?
So that happens already, right? Like if, as an example, here in Australia, I could theoretically own my health data, but it sits in a centralized repository which controls the consent model. But in reality, I don't own anything. I just, it's just that I have a little bit more ability to consent to how it's used. Again, man, I think it comes down to the user experience. If there is a way, actually, let me, it would be the user experience of me self-custodying my data, but also the ability to find a middle ground on ownership and how it's shared. And what do I mean by that is Ethereum has this concept still being developed called data coalition DAOs. The idea being, I have my data with me now, but I don't have time to decide what I want to do with this data. But there might be a DAO, which is, just think of it as a group of people who are transparently making decisions on my behalf. I can nominate my data to them. So this might be the middle ground. The middle ground here is I own my assets, but then I'm also able to delegate some of this to this, transparent entity. Think of it as a transparent corporation and a centralized organization that's transparent. That's it. And that can decide what to do with it. But I can opt in and opt out of this sort of DAO, right? So maybe the same thing might happen with financial industry where I own my crypto assets, but there might be like a DAO-based bank that I can go into it and get some of these sort of Web2 bank things that I like to do that I can't do with DeFi, right? So maybe this is kind of the middle ground might be where we end up in.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I like what you touched on about the idea of misuse. You also mentioned the idea of AI, which has just skyrocketed over the past year. Countless people are using it, and there's a lot of reasons that you can use it. But I want to zoom in and emphasize and allow you to share about some of those darker corners of Itheum that relate more with the idea of safeguarding users from this new type of technology, and what sort of areas you fear could be kind of used, or rather, what areas Itheum brings about that could be misused. And also, if you want to mention the Canary Net and how that might intertwine with the idea of misuse and trying to bring this new idea in the safest, most secure way possible.
Yeah, so Ethereum's actually in mainnet, but we launched under what we call Canary Net. And Canary Net, for those of you who are not familiar with Canary deployments, the idea is you've got something unique. You really don't know how it's going to be received. So you deploy it under Canary and you observe it. And then depending on that, you remove the Canary branding and you let it go into the wild, right? So it's like a bird in a cage and then you release it kind of thing. So we launched in Canary Net because when we said, okay, hey, you can come into our data decks and you've got some data, you tokenize it and you can trade it. There's so many things that can go wrong here, right? Like it could be scammers coming in there, trying to copy data from other people that they don't own and trying to sell it, pretending to be somebody else, or even trying to distribute some sort of nefarious content, right? Because it's an open market and it's a peer-to-peer market. If we just launched it, it would have been very irresponsible of us to do it. So we launched it in Canary Net. And what that basically means is there's a lot of whitelists at the moment. So if you want to mint Data NFTs, you go through a whitelist process. And that basically means is you got to have some social reputation. That's kind of one of our benchmarks to how we get whitelisted. And then when you mint your Data NFTs, you trade it on the Data NFT marketplace because it's got built-in protections about checking whether the data stream is up, and so on. But the goal is, we've observed it now, is to observe this protocol. And we have observed it for like 3 months. And we're starting to plan on dropping some of these guardrails, which it's going to happen actually very soon. So you'll probably hear this from us very soon, that we're dropping a pretty big guardrail, and you're going to see that really opened up Ethereum to different ecosystem players. Now, the ultimate goal, though, is that we remove everything and all the guardrails are dropped. If you have data, you can come and mint it as a Data NFT and you can trade it. And I think how that is going to get solved, and for us to do it in a responsible way, is we've got to put in place more DAO-based governance. So we've already started doing this. So we won't have one DAO. We're going to have multiple DAOs responsible for different things like curating people who are going to mint, curating people who have already minted. So we're putting in place this sort of decentralized governance mechanisms, but also reputation, right? We need a way to automatically determine the reputation of wallet that's interacting with the protocol. Because once somebody has put in a lot of effort to gain reputation, they are really going to think 10 times before they try to do anything, dodgy. Now, if they're just using disposable wallets, they're almost certainly going to do something weird, right? So the reputation part we have to solve. And NFMe ID, something that we have been working on for a while, but we haven't still been able to bring it to a point where we can release it, is this reputation piece. Once this piece comes in, the ultimate goal is we drop all the guardrails, and then Ethereum is decentralized, where you can plug in and out depending on who you are and what your role is in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that NFMe ID, that is. And my curiosity surrounding that is how that could shape in the future. And remind me, is Itheum, is it open source or is it pretty guarded right now?
Yeah, so it's at the moment it's partially open source. So we have about 40% of our protocol open source. So pretty much the data decks, the Explorer, some of our contracts are open source. The parts that are not open source now are the parts that are actually we look at it as different contracts that form one unit, and we haven't like completed the unit, so we haven't open sourced that part yet. But yeah, it's all going to be open source, man. I think ultimately we want to be a fully open, decentralized protocol.
Yeah. So when it comes to that social reputation you're kind of talking about, I think it's easy for myself and likely many others to see all the great benefits that could come along with that. But when it comes to the negative sides of that, I think there is such a thing as oversharing. You know, sometimes you have to think before you speak. Sometimes you say things that you wish you could take back and you apologize. So, you know, the idea is, well, what if you have data that is on this Web3 world that you aren't proud of, you didn't really know you were opening up to that, and kind of how you foresee navigating in this coming world where our data is controlled and sold, and we have the power to share data that we may not want to be shared at all.
Yeah. So, and it could also mean that you changed your mind, right? Like you minted some data NFTs, and then 6 months down the line, you're like, actually, I don't want this associated to me anymore. I want to exit the system. So these are some of the challenges we are always dealing with. Like what Ethereum's trying to do is, we don't want to blindly build stuff and push it out there. We want to like foresee some of these things and create some protocol elements that can deal with it. So to answer your question, right, like at the moment, we have this concept of data NFT fully transferable. We call them data NFT FTs, and musicians a good example. They can come and mint 5,000 pieces of a song or a playlist of music, and now they are obligated to keep their music up and running so long as the NFT is circulating, right? But we have mechanisms now in place and we're launching that can help the musician with this. Like, firstly, maybe they don't want to, I'm using musician as an example, but this applies to anybody producing original data. Maybe they don't want the overhead of maintaining their data right? So they want to like deploy it once, let it be immutable forever. So we're launching something that does decentralized streams on IPFS. So you upload it once and then like you can forget about it because it's there for as long as it's pinned on IPFS, right? We're also working with Airweave as well. Airweave is also really interesting in that aspect. Now, the second part of that is, what if the musician wants to exit the system, right? So at the moment, the terms of use of Canary Net, they have to stay as long as they want to, but there are things that they can do. They can like offer to buy back any sold data NFTs, but they're able to burn any of their collection and exit if they want to, right? So they can still do that. We also looking at okay, so that's the current sort of system, and this falls under the active data collection that I was talking about. In passive data collection, like where you're like just connecting your smartwatch to Ethereum, or you're connecting your PS4 account, PSN, PlayStation Network account to Ethereum, things that we're working on, like you are never going to be able to just trade all of your data. How that's going to work is your data goes into what we call a data vault, which belongs to you, and your data vault is soul-bound. You cannot trade it, and you can delegate who can use your data vault. So this is through Data Coalition DAO. So you say, hey, here's all my data collected into my data vault. I'm going to now delegate this PlayStation data to this DAO that's going to act on my behalf and trade access to it. If I want to exit the system, I just undelegate from the DAO and I come back and they can't access my data anymore. Now, of course, if your data is already taken and then used in the real world, there's no way you can't rewind that, right? Because in fact, I think this is one of GDPR's clauses as well. If it's already used, you can't undo that. It's only prevent use from it being used for further use cases, if that makes sense. So Data Coalition DAOs are going to solve this, I feel, to a certain extent with passive data collection. And the tooling that we're launching with the way storage happens and how you can burn data NFTs and so on, help with the active data collection of what you just described.
Yeah. And you mentioned just briefly there this idea of decentralized streaming. So can you explain how this interacts from the standpoint of creating data and minting it as a collection? How in the world does a musician or artist monetize their data through your platform on the streaming end of things?
Yeah, so what I was talking about was decentralized storage of data streams. So
Okay.
let me break that down a little bit.
Yeah.
So when we first launched Ethereum and we were inviting data creators, we were storage agnostic. So what we basically said is we will not influence where you want to store your data because that's a personal choice. You can store it on your computer, you can store it on AWS, you can store it on IPFS, on Airweave. We just provide you the licensing mechanism in front of where you store it, and we have a protocol that lets you do that. Now, what when we launched, and then as part of Canary Net, we observed this was actually a problem because a lot of people who come to us and like, hey, I want to mint my data, they always struggle with the storage piece because that's something it's not very intuitive, right? So we are now launching a storage solution where you can actually pick where you want to store your data. You can store it on centralized or decentralized. Now, as I was saying, Ethereum is not static data. So you're not, as a musician, you're not minting one song. With Ethereum, you can mint like a folder of songs, and then you can create a playlist. And then tomorrow you can change the order of that playlist. You can like continuously evolve this. And that's what we talk about streaming. So we're not specifically talking about the streaming of the music. We're talking about the data stream that's evolving depending on the files. But we still stream out music, but not to like the Web 2 extent of like what you see with Spotify and stuff, right? But if you like, for example, we've got a music data NFT collection minted on Ethereum at the moment, which has got, I think, 5 songs in it, where you can actually go to Ethereum Explorer and then you can see the order of the 5 songs and the music streams out to you. All of this is being done through Ethereum infrastructure. So yeah, we would mature it. I think we are always conscious to remind people that you're never going to get the performance of Web 2 with Web 3 at the moment, because Web 2 is super performant because it's so centralized. Web 3 is decentralized. There's always going to be some sort of teething issues there. But I think we've come to a point where we're quite happy with the performance as well.
Yeah, and that's great to hear. That's kind of really what sparked my interest finally, even though Ethereum has been in the ecosystem for some years now, and took your keynote at xDay for it to really kind of click for me, which I'm really stoked about as an artist and content creator of many shapes. So my curiosity behind Ethereum was really sparked at xDay. And I want to kind of take a moment to just kind of hear from you what's on top of mind for Ethereum right now, especially as the CEO. Yeah, a lot of your keynote did talk about NFTunes, which I think you were referring to without saying it explicitly. But in case you were talking about just the protocol itself rather than NFTunes specifically, yeah, if you could give us a quick overview, perhaps, of some of those items you touched on at xDay. Another level of that was the attention Ethereum is giving to the enterprise level, which is all sound and good for those interested in Ethereum itself and learning more. So what can you tell us? Give us an overview of that keynote at xDay, NFTunes, and what's kind of top of mind for Ethereum right now.
Yeah, so the keynote on xDay this time was about growth, right? So what we launched Ethereum in Canary Net, and then now we're like, okay, we have to grow this, right? We have to get adoption, and we basically have narrowed down on a few industries of focus, right? Like we don't want to be all over the place. We want to narrow the focus down. Music was something we're very interested in because it gets attention. People love music. Everyone loves music objectively, right? So. But there's real problems in the music industry, and we've been talking to some musicians and many indie musicians who always find it hard engaging community. They always find it hard finding a distribution deal. They're not really happy with the sort of royalties and stuff like that. So it seemed like they want more control. They wanted a bit more control about their music assets. And their distribution and the community. So NFTunes was born around on this aspect because we have the tech, and then there's this industry and this target group of indie musicians, and we're trying to now bring it together and launching again something that makes data ownership interesting. As going back to my previous point, it has to be interesting. If not, you're not going to use it. And in fact, it caught your attention because it was interesting, right? Like you probably knew what Ethereum was doing, but at that point you were like, okay, this sounds interesting. So that's the kind of thing we're trying to like tap into everywhere when people watch what we're doing. So NFTunes is it's actually already live. It's sitting as a widget in Ethereum Explorer at the moment. So you can go to explorer.ethereum.io and use NFTunes. And we're launching a couple more music data NFT collections as well. And you can listen to music, and you can even listen to it on X Portal Hub, where you can open up the app, and if you have the Data NFT, plays music. So that's NFTunes. I think the mid to long term plan for NFTunes is that it spins off as its own product, because Ethereum is infrastructure. It can be a music player on its own. So we are looking at, for us to reach that, of course, we need partnerships with people, with organizations which have a bigger cohort of indie musicians who can come on board. So that's NFTunes. Now, at the same time, if we want to grow Ethereum, we have to move away from like going after a single data creator and then getting them on board. We have to reach a broad sort of user group, and that's where Ethereum Enterprise comes in. Ethereum Enterprise is effectively going to a brand and saying, hey, you want to tokenize some of your data assets, or you want to launch a loyalty card, or you want to create a community of hyper-engaged people through data NFTs. Here's a collection you completely control, and you onboard 1,000 different people into it. So how that is helpful for Ethereum is now, instead of us going after active data creators and getting like one musician on, we've enabled a brand to bring on 1,000 musicians or 1,000 gamers or 1,000 customers. So that's the vision behind Ethereum Enterprise. Ethereum Enterprise already is complete. We've built it. It's on DevNet. It's being used by Inspire3, which is a loyalty card platform in Romania. So it's in private beta at the moment. It's being used in the real world. And if all goes to plan, we push it to mainnet, and then we brand activate it, basically get brands to come and build on it. But ultimately, what's happening that's behind the scenes that we don't talk about a lot is the getting to this passive data collection element, right? Like, we want anybody, regardless of whether you're a musician or whatever, to tap into Ethereum. So it could be an app or something where you get the app and then you share some data and you're rewarded. We have to reach everyone. Like, the goal is the barrier to entry for everyone should be very, very limited. So that's, we've kind of like hinted at it a few times, but it might be an app, it might be a plugin, it might be something that lets you become a passive data contributor to Ethereum. This is something we feel we have to do, because to get volumes of users, this is probably another way to do it. But ultimately, man, like, as I was saying, our goal now is to increase user base, and we're working on different ways to do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, from a community standpoint, I think it's not inevitable. I think it's blatant just how pivotal, quite literally, these data NFTs are in the emerging world of Web3, just in the MultiversX ecosystem alone, between having some of these different opportunities to earn by participating in different conversations. I can't remember that. You'll have to remind me. Its acronym is OAT. What is an OAT? It's
it's an on-chain achievement token. So it's quite interesting. Like, I mean, like, we've like, people ask me like, okay, how could I participate with Ethereum? Let's say you're a creator, right? Like, you produce content on X or Twitter, and then maybe what you can do is, you can write a tweet thread of like 9 tweets, and then your 10th one, you forward people over to go and claim an OAT, like you say, just to show that they have read that tweet thread, but also, maybe support your work by getting a data NFT that would unlock new content for them. So that's kind of a way to look at it. So OATs are on-chain achievement tokens. Think of it as reputation tokens.
And so this is a question that I have, and hopefully the audience will as well. So we all know the kind of joke, we'll call it, around the idea of the traditional NFT. You just right click save as. So my question, whether it be for music or for any other content that I'm participating in, or anybody else, what does that frame kind of look like in this world of data NFTs?
Mm.
Is data encrypted? Is it accessible on these explorers? Can you just go in and say, right click, save as? And
Yeah.
I'll leave it open. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. In fact, that's a question we get almost every time we speak. So yeah, if you have, let's say you have Bored Apes Club, you can right click save as, and then maybe you go and do that for the entire collection, and then you go and mint your own, Bored Apes. No one's going to bite, man, because they can prove on chain that you were never the original author, right? So I think that's what NFTs provide, is the provenance. In other words, who's the original author? You're actually proving that you are the original author. So that's the NFT argument. With Ethereum. We have the data that streams out to you. So firstly, like we're saying, we're storage agnostic, so you can store data anywhere. We never the origin of the data is never disclosed. So when you own a data NFT, the data is streamed out directly from origin or via a pipe. So nobody can actually see where it is. But if they download it on their computer, yes. So let's say it was an Excel file or an MP3, they could now take it and go and mint it as a new data NFT. But if they do that again, this comes down to you're not the author, and we can prove that on the blockchain. Part of the argument. The second part to this is we already launched a technology where you can store your data in wherever you want to, and you can containerize it. And what that basically means is, even if somebody by some weird chance discovers your data somewhere, they cannot access it because we're using native auth to secure the container. So you have to prove wallet ownership. The wallet ownership is transferred through the Ethereum protocol and ends up in the stream origin, and only then it's unclogged. So this is another way. Think of it as containers that are holding your data that are secured by a wallet. And the third part of this is, yes, encryption. So we're working also on the ability for a user to encrypt data within those containers. So now there's like 2 levels of protection. And then you provide a role to somebody else to access the encryption. So this is coming down on the line, but we are already doing some theory and proof of concepts on it. But yeah, that's hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. One glaring question of mine that encompasses all these different data creators, and that is very much prevalent for musicians and artists. Recently, I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and they, quote unquote, know enough about NFTs to think, in their opinion, that it's not the answer, it's not the solution. They're not interested. And for somebody like me that understands the opportunity here, my question to you is, how do you plan to convince artists to use these Web3 technologies instead of hoping for some, I don't know, some other bottom-up change to show Spotify or iTunes Music they're behemoths? So my thought is, no, I mean, we need to go ground up. We need to start with these, individual artists. But then again, you mentioned this idea of the enterprise. If we can get just one person to onboard, thousands in a different way, I'm not sure if that's intertwined. But yeah, Mark, how do you plan to convince artists to contribute to the world of Web3 data?
Okay, so if you're looking at musicians, in fact, this is we talk about this a lot internally at the moment as well, is how do you do the value proposition, right, to a musician? Now, if you talk to indie musicians, and I think you probably fall into that category, right, Stephen? Like indie musician,
sure, yeah.
you would say, yeah. Now, what are your biggest challenges, right? Like what do you find difficult as an indie musician?
Well, aside from writing the music itself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, very much so. I feel overwhelmed by the options that we have and understanding how challenging it is. You mentioned some things that are barriers to entry for musicians, and things go beyond that, but everything can really kind of come back to the idea of money needs to be generated, our lives need to be supported. So how do we basically create a business, create an audience? And I mean, we're kind of talking about, and this is why it excited me, because Itheum is working on these solutions. But aside from creating the music, it really just comes back down to monetizing it. And
yeah.
I guess just really getting people to bite. It's not, and obviously that implies, well, if the data is good, you won't have to worry about it. But most definitely it's the idea of, gosh, like how, and then for the fact that I see the value in the NFT, data NFT tech, it's like, all right, well, I know I want to put my music on the blockchain, but I also know that like the majority of people in my circle will,
Yeah,
like, they won't be my consumers because they'll be like,
got it. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, yeah, like who cares, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah,
I totally get it, right?
yeah.
So I think the way you can look at it is, and we've been talking, actually, we're having this exact same discussion with multiple musicians. They know, like, they have a problem. The problem they have is they are finding it hard to distribute their music. They're finding it hard to have like some income from it, and they're finding it hard to engage, like create a super engaged fan base who would then create a network effect for them to,
Hmm.
did more people to discover their stuff. So maybe the first thing is, like, we have to stop thinking that the audience is the same Web2 audience, right?
Hmm.
That's, you
Yeah.
don't want that, because they are not on in Web3, so why would you even waste time in that, right? But Web3's got an insanely crazy DGen audience, right? Now, uh, for the last 10 years, this single group of people have been pushing Web3 forward, and they are like insanely dedicated, right? Like, from a community point of view, there's nothing like Web3 and nothing like Web3 DGen community, right? So the thing here is, you should look at it as, okay, I've got good original music. NFT has got an insane DGen community around the world. I am finding a new community. That's the way you should look at it, right? Like,
Yeah.
I am going
Yeah.
to tap in to people who like NFTs, but now they're going to be exposed to my music. Now, if you can, like with Ethereum, you can put any image you want to the data NFT. So imagine now for a moment, you can using AI, you take your music and you couple it with some generative art from AI, and you create original art. Now, all of a sudden, your music is being purchased by people who just like the art, but
Mm.
they also get exposed to your music, right? So the best way to look at it is, okay, forget about trying to convert your existing Web2 friends into this. Tap into this insanely dedicated Web3 community, and tap into the NFT people, and like just
Yeah.
give them some really cool NFT art which happens to contain your music. And when they have, let's imagine they like enjoy it for a while, and then they decide they don't like you anymore, they don't like your music anymore, they retrade it, and then they retrade it, and they find this secondary market. You're never going to get this in Web2. So you should look at it as a way to tap into this crazy DGen space. And guess what, man? Like, when the bull market hits, the DGen space explodes, right?
Yeah.
From an interest point of view. So I'm not specifically talking about like tokens and buying and stuff, but from an interest point of view, you are exposed to an audience that you would never be able to tap into.
Yeah. So it's almost as if you're saying go to a place where there's no competition, right? Because if I throw up a single on Spotify, I will really have
Yeah,
to put rubber to the road in this Web 2 kind of in real life world. So it is a bit of a decision, but most definitely I think it's a Venn diagram here. I don't think that any
mm,
artist that I am or and that I'm speaking to should just say, "Oh, I'm just going to drop everything I'm doing in real life," and just, even though I
exactly.
totally acknowledge what you're saying.
You should do both. You should
Yeah.
like do your Spotify thing if you want to, and then try this new thing. Like, if you go Spotify, you're like a drop in the ocean, right? But
Hmm.
if you were to mint a data NFT, because it's so unique, you like stand out, right? Like, you're this big container ship on the ocean or something like that. You like stand out. So I think that's the thing. But yeah, for sure, man, don't become like a full Web3 musician. Your goal should be to be a musician and then produce different distribution channels.
Yeah, yeah, that's really great advice. So kind of as we're coming to a close here with our time, I want to give a chance for anyone listening out there that is a developer. Hopefully for those content creators, it's very evident how we can get started and start contributing. But in terms of building on Itheum, what are the opportunities for developers to create on Itheum?
Yeah. So up to now, we spoke about, data creators. These are the people supplying data. We talked about enterprises. They are also data suppliers. And then we have data consumers, people who are like buying data. But the very important segment here exists, and they're developers, right? We want developers to use data NFTs as building blocks and create apps, like create a new music player, create a new video player, create games, create all this kind of stuff on Ethereum where you can own data assets. So we're really pushing the build on Ethereum narrative. If you go to docs.ethereum.io, just head down to there's a governance section, I think. We're launching an accelerator. In fact, we're closing the first cohort of this accelerator. And this is to onboard developers who want to tokenize data and then want to create private data marketplaces or experiences, app experiences that are built on data ownership. So if you're a developer, we have really simple to use tools. Our next cohort we're going to announce that are building on Ethereum. They're doing some really interesting stuff, like as an example, we got a social media stuff. They got one that's like tokenizing 3D files that could be then licensed and traded, and like all of these interesting use cases about if it can be tokenized, if it's a data asset or work or something that could be tokenized, you can use Ethereum to like create an experience around it. So if you're a developer, definitely come and go to docs.ethereum or come to Discord, hit us up. We could potentially bring more people into the accelerator. We're almost closing that off, but we would probably run like regular accelerators to get more people to build on Ethereum.
Yeah, that's really great. So yeah, definitely developers out there, follow that instruction from Mark. So now directing towards the community and engagement side of things, what is your vision for the Ethereum community? Who do you kind of see banding around it? And what is obviously we talked about the heart of Ethereum, where it got its roots, and even where the word is derived from itself. But in your view, your opinion, what are the types of people that should really be drawn into this ecosystem, aside, of course, from content creators? What sort of people are you hoping to cultivate around the Ethereum community?
Yeah, for sure. Content creators, anyone with original data is with but from a community point of view, like Ethereum, we work a lot with the community because we always acknowledge that if we build something, we need the community involved because we are a data platform after all, and everyone has got data. So one of the initiatives, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, we launched Trailblazer. So Trailblazer
yeah.
is in fact, a data NFT. So it's actually a data NFT that we use to educate and activate our community. So we've been using Trailblazer for a few months now, and it's actually, we're starting to see like insane high engagement. And what we realized is that this is a great tool to activate our community. And when I say activate, I'm talking about like we educate them about data ownership, we make it fun. We follow all these core principles that we have, right? And the idea is now we're going to have this segment of our community that's super active, and we can like go to our community to do things like governance at some point. We can go to this community to onboard new users or to like get them on to try new stuff. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to create the funnel, right? So we have the broader community, then eventually we want them to end up in Trailblazer. And with Trailblazer, you get access to these early access to what we're launching, and you can be part of like this diehard community that we will always work with.
Yeah. And so last question, which probably should have been earlier in the show, but I want to end kind of with questions about the Ethereum token itself. Very succinctly, I know we're closing on time here. What are the utilities of the Ethereum token? And is it something, not financial advice, is it something that users, especially content creators or developers interacting with Ethereum, is that something that they should consider having in their portfolio for that utility?
So it is a utility token. It's got a few key sort of utilities around the protocol. Firstly, you'll see a lot in governance. So that's not just governance of the main protocol, but governance of data coalition DAOs and the sub DAOs that govern different parts. So Ethereum is going to be used there. At the moment, it's effectively used in the data DEX for you to swap the tokens. So that's but that's probably a secondary utility. Ethereum's token will eventually end up more like a gas token and so on. I don't want to give too much away. We are talking to MX about sovereign shards and all of that stuff, where we want to elevate the Ethereum token into being like the security guarantee of the protocol. Like you have to bond tokens, you have to lock away tokens to interact with the protocol. Again, going back to Ethereum, right? Like we can only make it fully publicly decentralized when we are comfortable it won't be misused. And the way to do that is through bonding tokens and creating Ethereum, the Ethereum token becoming the core component. And so so eventually it'll end up as our goal is to make it the gas token and also the bonding token of Ethereum.
Awesome. Well, that is about all the time we have for today. So Mark, are there any other final thoughts or advice that you have for myself or listeners, of course?
No, I mean, thank you for this conversation. I loved your questions were very well thought, and I love how you prepared as well. You sent me the draft quite early, so well done on that, Stephen. And I think, yeah, just from a community point of view, yeah, I think rally around, like, sometimes in the MultiversX community, you see it's kind of like positive, negative. Like ultimately, we're all in this together, and I think that's we have to always remember that. Like if you look at other L1s, like, and they, we have to the one that pushes these L1s forward is always the community. And I think if we let like some negative aspects like kind of overarch like what's happening with the building and stuff, that's when we kind of like fall down, like we all fall down. So it's a ship. The way to look at it is that it's a ship and we're all in this ship. If one of us sinks, we're all going to like sink. So I think that's the only thing. Broader advice to the community is just rally around the builders, rally around the creators, rally around the protocol. Like, people can make mistakes, but just accept those mistakes and help them move forward, kind of thing. Yeah,
that's a great word to leave us with. As I said at the very beginning of this episode, and it really piggybacks on what you just ended with there, Mark, just how much Itheum is putting spotlight on other builders within MultiversX. And as you expand to the multi-chain, I'm sure that attitude will continue. Very much looking forward to this discussion to continue into this idea of sovereign shards. But as far as the interview goes, I want to thank you so much, Mark, for the time you've given me. I'm hoping for the viewers, the questions and answers were both good. So make sure to drop a like on this video. As always, right, we got to feed that algorithm some data, and looking forward to seeing Itheum grow and improve and evolve, and allowing and empowering creators like myself and many of our viewers as well to go out, find new communities, build new things, and really reshape the world altogether. So thank you so much once again, Mark. Make sure to follow him on X, get involved on Telegram, Discord, all that good stuff. But as far as this chat goes, it's come to an end. Looking forward to seeing Itheum propel into the future.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right, everybody, that will do it for today's video. Again, huge thank you to the team at Itheum for giving me that Trailblazer Data NFT to give away. And of course, huge thank you to Mark for offering your time and getting this video out there to the world so people can learn more about Itheum, what they're doing with this NFT 2.0 idea. So that's all I've got for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.